Dolphins fans, how are we doing today? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network. Today's video, we are highlighting my top 3 players that I would consider to be maybe up against it a little bit when it comes to making this team's initial 53-man roster. But with the right showing, doing the right things here in this upcoming training camp, I think they may have a shot of making this team's initial 53-man roster. So that's what we are doing today. I am going to give my top 3 in just a second. Before we jump into mine, I gotta hear from you. Drop your top under-the-radar players that you think have a good shot of making this team's initial 53-man roster leading up to week 1. I know that's a long ways away. We got some offseason left before training camp. We got a big contract that we got to get done before training camp. We'll get through the summer. We'll talk more about it then. But drop your guys in the comments. If you haven't gotten subscribed yet, make sure you are doing so. As always, thank you to everyone that has done so. Let's jump into it. We're going to start right away with one of our UDFAs. That's Grayson Murphy, the undrafted free agent out of UCLA. Actually totaled 10 sacks over the 2 seasons that he had at UCLA. Transfer from, I believe, North Texas as well. You look at him for an edge rusher, he lacks that ideal size, has a little bit of those shorter arms that we talk about when it comes to the edge rusher positions. Likely one of the bigger reasons why he went undrafted, but he has been the most, in fact, impactful player of all the Miami Dolphins undrafted free agents so far this offseason with OTAs and with minicamp. The other obvious thing that I think that he has going for him is just the sheer fact that he plays the edge rusher position. Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, if they aren't ready to go for that first part of the season, you know what? If they're placed on IR to begin the season, we're going to need some bodies at that edge rusher position. Now, obviously, we signed Shaq Barrett earlier in free agency. We did some work in the NFL draft. We drafted Chop Robinson in the 1st. We drafted Mohamed Kamara in the 5th. So it's not like we don't have options. Like I've said in the past, if those first 2 guys are healthy, we have a deep set of edge rushers. But it's also a position where, you know what, maybe depth is tested a little bit earlier this season if those first 2 guys can't go. So if Grayson Murphy can continue to impress into training camp, you know, when we get some pads on, things get amped up a little bit, we're running with a full squad a little bit more. He showed out in OTAs and minicamp, put in the work in training camp. I think he's got a shot to stick. All right, let's talk a little bit about cornerback Ethan Bonner, a guy that we got to see, I'll say briefly, last season on the practice squad for the majority of the season, but actually elevated to the active roster a couple of times towards the end of the year. Was actually active during that wild card playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs as well. But if you look at the cornerback position, it's another position, in my opinion, where there might be a path for Bonner, maybe a different guy, maybe it's Storm Duck, one of these guys to make some noise and possibly stick on this initial 53-man roster. Look at these guys. You got Jalen Ramsey, you got Kendall Fuller, you got Cam Smith. Those guys are locks. Kader Kohu should be pretty damn safe as well. But then you're looking to fill out this position with the likes of Nick Needham, Elijah Campbell, Siren Neal, Ethan Bonner, and then you've got 3 undrafted free agents. Now, I'll say this. I like Nick Needham and I like Elijah Campbell. They can both play cornerback, obviously. Needham's getting cross-trained at safety. Elijah Campbell has some experience at safety as well. I like their position versatility. That's going to go a long ways with certain coaching staffs. Neal, when you look at him, he felt like a core special teamer when we made that signing in free agency. But then if you're looking at who has the experience after that, and like I said, albeit not that much experience, it's Ethan Bonner. And like I said, I know it's a small sample size, but Ethan Bonner actually, I'll say that he held his own. He played pretty well when he was thrown into games last year. Remember, he was actually the guy when we were decimated at cornerback. He was getting the nod over the second rounder of Cam Smith. He actually had a pass breakup on 2 targets during the regular season. And if you remember, he actually forced a fumble in that playoff game against the Chiefs. So like I said, extremely small sample size. I get that, but he did perform pretty well in some late season situations. To wrap up Ethan Bonner here, I'll also add this nugget. It's kind of the Dolphins' MO. It's speed. I remember at some point during the season last year, Tyreek, I think he called him like the the second fastest player on the Miami Dolphins, something along those lines. He probably isn't, but I like Tyreek's way of like giving a little jab to like an age hand to a Jalen Waddle. Regardless, I was curious. I looked it up. At Ethan Bonner's pro day, he did run in the 4.3. So yeah, speed's not an issue. He's got enough wheels to hang with some of these NFL wide receivers. But regardless, another guy that I think is going to have opportunities to prove his worth during training camp. And think about who he's forced to go up against. Yeah, it's all the guys I just mentioned. It's some of the best wide receivers. It's the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL for my money. He gets to go against those kind of guys each and every day in training camp practices. So he's going to have a shot as well. Let's wrap things up with Taj Washington, wide receiver out of USC. And yeah, we have draft capital invested in Taj Washington, but keep in mind, it's a 7th rounder, and 7th round picks are not remotely close to being locks for making NFL roster. Look last year, 2023, neither our 6th or 7th rounder made that initial 53-man roster. So yeah, I still consider a guy like Taj Washington as a guy that's probably facing an uphill battle, to say the least, as we head into training camp here. Now, I would say that the primary thing that he actually has going against him is the position he plays, kind of opposite of Ethan Bonner and Grayson Murphy. I say that saying, obviously, that the front office and coaching staff saw enough from him to warrant actual draft capital. But check out how loaded this position is. You already know these people. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Odell Beckham Jr., Eric Ezukama, River Craycraft, Braxton Berrios, Malik Washington. That's 7 guys already right there. How many wide receivers do you think we're going to keep? Historically, it's about 6. You might be able to get 7. Obviously, you've got the practice squad as well. But we haven't even talked about Braylon Sanders, the Anthony Schwartzes of the world. It's not just Taj Washington battling for one of these wide receiver spots. There's other guys in this battle as well. We're going to do positional battles coming up here for training camp. Wide receiver is so stacked. It's one I'm definitely going to have my eye on. But a couple of things to keep your eye on when it comes to the possibility of a guy like Taj Washington making that initial 53-man roster. One, if you keep Taj Washington instead of maybe one of these more veteran guys, you're getting a pretty damn nice cost savings by keeping the younger option that's on a 7th round rookie contract. That's a little bit enticing considering all the financial issues that we've had over the last year or so. And 2, let's just say that we can stay healthy. We can manage to stay healthy at the wide receiver position during training camp. Well, I would say that we officially have a surplus of NFL caliber wide receivers, which opens the door for a potential trade. And the player that I've talked a little bit about so far this offseason has been Braxton Berrios. Now, I'm not going to go into a ton of depth about this right now. That would actually probably warrant its own video. But in my opinion, Braxton Berrios is kind of that middle of the road wide receiver that we currently have rostered that I actually think you might be able to get a little bit of return on. Now, plus factor in the idea that you already got Tyreek Hill, you got Jalen Waddle. We just signed Odell Beckham Jr. We drafted the Washingtons. Paying a guy like Braxton Berrios, I don't want to get a little too far ahead of myself, but the idea of paying Braxton Berrios where he maybe doesn't have maybe his foot in the door to get a ton of playing time the way that it is, just kind of feels maybe a little bit silly to me. So like I said, a lot of speculation there. We'll see how things play out, but definitely a possibility. Like I said, not guaranteeing anything, just a thought at this point in time. Something to monitor, though, in the event a guy like Taj Washington, much like these other guys we've talked about, can continue to impress once training camp does indeed hit later in July. Miami Dolphins fans, we are going to wrap it there for today. But as I mentioned, drop your under-the-radar guys that you think have a good shot of making this team's initial 53-man roster in the comments. Get subscribed if you haven't done so already. As always, thank you to everyone that did. Dolphins fans, we got a lot more stuff planned to be coming out here leading up to training camp. Once training camp hits, we'll be doing recaps from all of those practices as well. So like I said, get subscribed if you have not done so already. Thank you once again for your time. And until next time, Miami Dolphins fans, Fins